Okay, so welcome back to the Genki Comics channel. So, as always, it's me, Charles, and I wanted to introduce my guest here. Ryan Howe is a Saskatoon-based comic book artist, been doing comics for a couple of decades plus.
2021, people have been paying me. It's exciting.
Yeah, and...
We're not 21, 2001.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for 2 years. It's awesome.
So you're based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and lucky enough to have grown up with you in small town southern Saskatchewan, and you're a guest here in my Calgary home office.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so you've built up a really good body of work in 20 years. You've been working also pretty steadily throughout that.
Yeah, there's been fits and gaps where I'll be really busy and not really busy, but it's nice because it gives you time to recharge. But for the most part, it's been pretty consistent with projects in the pipeline.
And so who would you count as your major sort of artistic influences as you've been going through your career?
There's lots and it changes. A lot of guys like European growing up because we had access to like Tintin and Asterix and stuff like that. Alex Toth, I didn't realize at the time it was Toth, but back in the day, Dell did those Disney Digest collections, but they didn't credit any artists. So you'd have Carl Barks, who was the good duck artist, which is great. Nobody knew who he was for decades. By that time, I was lucky because they figured it out. Alex Toth. You get some other guys in there. I was exposed to some like Dan Rosa, Scrooge comics as well. But then you get into like the mainstream Marvel stuff, like we're reading like Mark Bagley stuff and Rick Larson and Todd McFarlane. So all that kind of, I like Silver Surfer artist.
Ron Lim.
Yeah. So all those guys at that time.
Yeah, because we were really eating that stuff up in the 90s.
Yeah.
Was when our friend group was really into comics. And is that early 90s, the Spider-Man, Eric Larson and Bagley and those guys. And that seemed to be like, it's interesting to hear that that's been such a huge influence.
We were right at the end. So we had that big resurgence of like Marvel superstar with like McFarlane and Lee just kind of at their heights when we got into it in the late 80s, early 90s. And then they left for Image in 91, 92. Because I remember I got that last single titled Spider-Man issue with like the buy Todd at the end. Like, what? McFarlane's leaving? Because there was no internet to figure this stuff out, right? You're like, well, I guess he's doing his own thing. And then Spawn came out. So we were really lucky. We also had, do you remember Marvel used to do those Marvel Tales books? So you get like reprints of like Kirby and like Ron Friends and like all kinds of weird stuff. So you had that Marvel actually doing introspective stuff. So you had the classic guys coming into it as well.
Yeah, sort of our first taste of that classic Golden Age stuff.
Yeah. It was so many Ditko reprints because they were constantly redoing like Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and like Avengers reprints. So you'd have access to that because the drugstores didn't have anything consistent, right? Like we went to, was it Buy Right or whatever the one when Flash was? We had nothing consistent. So you'd get like one issue and then a completely different thing the next week or month if you were in, and maybe 3 months later that same book you pick it up in a new arc, or it would a quick recap of what happened. So you were exposed to a lot of stuff, not necessarily willingly, but you were exposed to a lot of stuff. So.
Yeah, it kind of gave us a chance as youngsters to kind of, is like going into the candy shop, right? And you're not sure what you're going to discover that day, but it might be your new favorite flavor.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like science fiction stuff when I started getting the Silver Surfer and that, and you were huge into Spider-Man and more adventure stuff. And like you were saying with your classic Disney and the Scrooge McDuck stuff, you were really into.
Yeah. I remember a lot of time too. And like it was like the heavy metal cartoon we were exposed to. Heavy metal was on the newsstands as well, so we pick up some more of that really stylized European stuff there too. You get more of a painterly quality and you'd see what they were doing. Mobius. I don't think I ever saw Mobius stuff at that point. It was way later before that kicked in. But you'd see the influence, like Fifth Element came out, and you'd start seeing all that stuff kind of creep in. So we were really, considering how isolated we were really lucky for the amount of stuff we were actually able to get our hands on.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it was being, that sort of isolation caused us to always be looking outward.
Yeah.
Like the discovery of heavy metal and we were being influenced by Mobius without even knowing it because it was Blade Runner and Fifth Element and all that stuff coming together.
Even like 80s movies with that stuff, you see like the art direction was like very stylized realism. It wasn't like in the 70s movie direction was very literal, and then you get into like the 80s and it kind of opens up with like Lucas and stuff, and you get like Willow and like Blade Runner and like all that other stuff is coming in where you get like really heavily cool designs and art direction and stuff. So we were really lucky now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Because when we started going to like an actual comic book shop in Moose Jaw, so we had Reader's Bookshop there, then I think, especially for myself, you'd have pull lists, you get more focus. You're like, at this much, what I can afford for this, so I'm only going to get these books.
Mm-hmm.
So I know like the first or second time I was in there, I managed to pick up Dark Knight Returns. So I got that, and that was years after it actually came out. So I was exposed to like the Frank Miller. This is a very different Batman than like what they've been doing in the 70s and Adam West stuff. I'm like, oh, this is wildly different. But then it was literally just Spider-Man. I remember I followed J. Scott Campbell on Gen 13. But it was really just like 4 or 5 books, and it was just focused at that point. That expansion didn't really continue until, maybe college, but probably 2002 or 3 when the internet became faster and more people started being able to put stuff up that they were interested in too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
at that point, we were out on our own, out of college, in our careers, starting to build that.
Yeah. So you're already looking outward again because you're trying to increase your artistic influence. You're like, oh, look at all this stuff. So and libraries had started stocking graphic novels. We were really lucky because the town library had access. Well, the librarian was a science fiction fan for one thing, so it was very well stocked. But she had access to the bigger provincial library, so she was able to get us in comics and stuff like that. So we lucked out.
Yeah, we really did pretty well, and it says something about the culture of that time as well, where people were just absorbing that stuff, and it was starting. We talk about where we're headed as a culture now towards this. Are we heading towards this almost like monoculture where it's ubiquitous? And we were guided to that through that era where people were really these cultural zeitgeists were happening. So some of these even action movies coming out became these huge cultural touchstones for a much larger audience.
Yeah, it's you're right. It's a really neat, almost waypoint in culture itself.
Yeah, like this blooming of that.
Because you have like the 80s action star, it all kind of blossoms out of that, and then that actually influences what kind of movies are made by their interests in things. And then you get that science fiction resurgence because of like Alien and then Predator and stuff, and even like a bizarre like Roger Rabbit's pastiche of like Last Action Hero, where it's blending genres and stuff like that too. And yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Frank Miller because, and that's one that I always attributed earlier in your career. I thought I always saw a little more Frank Miller in your work. Fine line work, and then these deep black areas, like almost working like a chiaroscuro, like that. That sort of major contrast. Was that something that you still feel you kind of stick with, or is that moving? Did it transition out of that at some point? No, the Frank Miller influence itself did, because I like I said, I got Dark Knight Returns, and I'm like, look what Miller's doing, and I kind of followed him a bit, and I saw like 300 and the other stuff. Sin City was wonderful, but I realized which the parts of Dark Knight Returns that I really liked were the Klaus Janson and the Frank Miller collaborations, not necessarily just Frank Miller. He follows a much more Will Eisner approach. And my interests were more in that, like you said, the heavy blacks and the fine lines and things like that, where you're balancing and playing with the negative space. And I realized that was from like the Toth school and that kind of stuff. You see in like Joe Kubert too. And I'm like, oh, I want to follow those guys. And then I kind of segued out of that. So Miller was an influence very early on. But once I kind of was able to see where that lineage came from, I tended to go down that path instead. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so it's much heavier with Toth now for that. So
well, let's delve into some of your work then. I've got everything sort of laid out here that I have. I have a lot of your print stuff, not even all of it, but a lot of it.
Most of it, yeah.
Yeah, a good chunk of it, and especially like I was saying, some of your earlier stuff, like especially Gun Street Girl and things like that. For me, that's where I'm. When I was mentioning some of the stuff about the heavy blacks, I see that a lot in yours, where there would be. And so let's talk about that a little bit. I'll notice where you have a lot of, say, fine lines, and then you'll all of a sudden hit us with like a black page. I find in my own work sometimes I do that as well, where I say, oh, I've done some fine lines, now I'm going to hit them with a crazy piece of contrast. Do you do that consciously, or does it just kind of flow?
So Gun Street was 50-50. So it was my first stuff. It was like I didn't ink this part of it either. So like I had some influence in it, but maybe some things are emphasized versus others that I had intended. So I was planning for it, but again, I was. I'll come back to this page. What page are you on here? 76. We'll come back to that in a moment. I'll tell you a story of that. So Gunstreet Girl was the first comic I ever did for somebody else. Preston Cooper was the husband of Barbaline Cooper, who was the author of this, and he had a column up on, I want to say Comic Book Resources or something that I was a regular reader of, and he was looking for an artist for this book. They had a couple other people do like short issues, but they weren't able to stick around for it.
Yeah.
And I think I sent him a Catwoman drawing. He's like, it's great. And so I started doing this. And I'm like, oh, now I'm doing this. We were part of...
Now you're committed.
Yeah. I think we've done maybe one issue, and then like way back in the day with webcomics, one of the big ones was Modern Tales. And the guy, I believe it was the guy that started that, was doing a action version of that called Graphic Smash. And Gunstreet Girl was one of the launch titles for that. So this was all like super early days. I had no idea what I was doing. I can start seeing where I was feeling stuff out and things like that, but I wanted to do that really black heavy stuff. And I'm trying to plan for it, but I also don't have a clue what I'm doing. So it is planned. It's not always successful. It's maybe 10% successful, but it's like you said, that Frank Miller influence. I'm trying to shoot for that where I think it was Joe Kubert that had said, you want to make sure that, it's either Kubert or Toth, but it said that you want to make sure it works 100% in black and white so that the colorist both knows what they're doing and they can't mess it up. It'll always be strong no matter what. My problem was I didn't know when to back off stuff, so I'd over render and things like that. Like all those bricks, you don't need all those bricks, or it should kind of bleed in more so these guys pop more.
Gotcha.
So, and these guys should have been lighter as well, starting... if you look at, and it's not always consistent with a guy like Toth, the faces tend to be usually fully lit and it kind of comes down into the shadows. So it's not always, but for the most part, where I was trying to render everything. So you still have that influence like the Marvel guys where you're hitting them with like heavy shadows. Yeah. I didn't know what I was doing with hatching. I was just like, oh, this is kind of fun. So it's really sporadic. I don't really hatch anymore. I do mostly like a Mike Mignola thing where it's just chunkier blacks, and I might put in like the little triangle, like mini hatches if I have to.
Gotcha. Yeah.
For this though, what was that? Phase 76?
76, yeah.
So on this, it goes wildly different for no apparent reason, because on the previous page, you have, I think somebody else inked this too. I don't think I did.
Oh, okay, yeah, so you...
Yeah. So this page was the last one of this, and then probably a couple of weeks had gone by because I was just doing these on the side, and there'd be a while go between them, and I discovered Travis Charest. I'm like, Travis Charest does amazing hatching. No clue what I was doing, so I'm like, I'm gonna go buy a repeatograph. And I started just doing all this fine line work for no rhyme or reason. I could have waited 3 pages till I was done the stupid story, but I absolutely had to try it. So it's wildly divergent and not successful at all. But
and so you kind of you delved back into.
So this is more modern stuff. This would have been 2019.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So when we redid the book, I redid all the chapter breaks because it was Graphic Smash. It was formatted for webcomics. So these were all horizontal for the main page. Right. We'd always done these as verticals, but these wouldn't have worked. So I just redrew all of the intros.
Gotcha. So you said you weren't always inking yourself in this, but were there times that you were?
Most of them are inked. There's maybe 3 stories I did. So this
this delves more into, and suddenly instead of just black and white line work,
more hatching.
You go into some actual halftone, some actual shading work here. As well.
There was a reason for that.
Was that you who was doing the shading work as well?
Yeah. Yes. I want to say maybe.
It's been a few years.
It's been a few years. I think I did the shading on this one. I don't think this was ever a color one. So when we did this collection, I didn't have some of the art files. So black colors were converted to grayscale, I think. But on this one, I think I might have done the shading on it because it looks like my really sloppy, soft shading that I was doing.
So this was your first one you did for someone else.
Yeah, so this was written with Barbaline Cooper. Yeah, Barbaline credited.
And it was a pretty early LGBTQ piece as well. So it was actually pretty groundbreaking in that way. I mean, it's not the first, but it was in a pretty early wave of that as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we very specifically did was it was never cheesecake. The main character, Liz, is it's never played out for that. She's not like a girly girl. She's not there for the male gaze or anything like that. Her being a lesbian is literally just part of her personality. That's all it is. There's nothing ever really drawn towards it.
Is what makes great LGBTQ stuff is that when they just happen to be, it's not centering the entire, hinging the plot and everything on it. It just, they can just exist in that world as that.
Exactly. It's a facet of her character, but it's not who she is. Mm-hmm. She doesn't tie everything around it. So she was a really fun character to do. But yeah, like it's really funny too, because like character heights change and things like that. Because I wasn't smart enough to make model sheets and
which you are really strong on now. I noticed even in some of your works, even like Suicide 5, it's got, I think this one has some of the, was it Suicide 5 that has some of your...
It might be, those are just sketches for the characters. Those weren't even like model drawings. I was just figuring out to make sure they were approved for that.
Yeah, but you are figuring, like you seem to make a really conscious effort to do that. You make sure all your ducks are in a row. Yeah. That you are, you're nailing everything so that their little idiosyncrasies, their little quirks is working and is consistent.
So do you remember, this is not to crap on Mark Bagley, because I love Mark Bagley, and the amount of pages he puts out is ridiculous. Yes. Do you remember there was a Spider-Man issue, I don't know, it's like 367 or something like that, whatever. There was a construction worker on the street, and you're like, holy crap, that's Eddie Brock. It's not Eddie Brock. It's just drawn exactly like Eddie Brock. Whereas if the colors would have given him like brown hair, you would have twigged on it, but he drew and colored exactly the same. So I want to make sure that everybody's distinct, at least in the main cast, so there's no mix-ups or anything like that. Especially if I know, like, for Suicide 5, it's going to be, it's 6 issues, I can't remember, but it's a lot longer book, so it's going to take me longer. I'm not visiting some of those characters as frequently. I'll forget what I'm doing, so I want to make sure I've got, and actually even a couple of them, you'll see, like, oops, sorry, let me put your finger there. So, like, this dude here, by the time I get back to him, way down... where his kind of demise happens. Like here, I was kind of squirrely on what his looks actually were like, and it took me a while to kind of refirm that up. Now I'd sit down and I just sketch him a few times to make sure I knew what was happening, but I can really tell when like my art, if I've been practicing something or I haven't been, and my art's kind of in flux, and it's a little more malleable for how features come together and stuff like that, so things look a little bit different. That hasn't happened for a long time, and I think it's just because I've been much more consistent in drawing. And I'm smart enough now not to chase the shiny object that looks really fun until I'm done something.
Gotcha. So you kind of lock yourself into a mode. For that project, and then if you're gonna delve into something, a new sort of technique or something else, you're going to wait until the next time when you can apply it fully. So
like with Bad Karma, which is such a long book. Style-wise, I didn't want to experiment at all because I needed everything to be consistent. Mm-hmm. There was a little more character stylization as I got more comfortable with how they fit structurally, but essentially the characters stayed within that mold start to finish because I knew this would go wildly off the rails if I didn't. It's also why I draw almost consistently sequentially. So if I do have a weird shift, there's not a weird blurb in the middle that looks wildly different from everything around it.
Oh yeah, versus that doing the beginning and the end, and then all of a sudden it's a journey all through the middle.
Yeah, I have done that in a couple books, and I have to be really careful to make sure it kind of fits. There's a story I'm working on now where we ended up drawing a couple pages at the beginning, a couple pages in the middle, and then a few around it. So it was making sure that it wasn't even just the drawing style, but like character hair and like clothing matched up in the sequences to lead up to that spot, or else things just wouldn't make sense. So I try to stay
challenge. Yeah. So let's talk about Suicide 5 quickly, because now chronologically, I'm not sure where this falls in your sort of suite of work that you did, but this is wildly different than a lot of your stuff. Like it's such a darker tone than most of your stuff. A lot of your stuff does have mature themes. Burning Black has, like death and naming and stuff. Yeah. But this one, like, this is a super dark book. Like and also very mature in that there's nudity, there's full frontal nudity and things like that. And not a ton of it, but there are some times where there's, sexual content and things like that. Yeah. Never really gratuitous, but like.
There's a few times. No, there's a few times. It's incredibly full on. Not even like, I wouldn't even say the sexual content's necessarily super gratuitous. It'd probably be about the equivalent of like a Friday the 13th in the mid 80s kind of thing.
Yeah, like the violence is there's a love scene, like a romance scene, as they would call it back in the day. A romance scene, it's some boning happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of boning going on. But I would say the violence itself is significant. I've been over it a couple times where I split that. getting that YouTube rating. The violence is significantly more gratuitous, though, and that's kind of the point of the book. Is it shows kind of the ridiculousness of it and just the foolhardiness of the characters.
Now, do you tend to color your own work as well?
No, I didn't color anything.
Okay, you don't color anything.
No.
Yeah,
a couple of reasons. I'm very slow for one thing.
Gotcha.
I'm not really good at it. So,
but you're really fast when it comes to your penciling and inking. It seems.
I have worked out ways of making sure it's as efficient as possible.
Yes.
Digital is my groove because I'm a really scribbly artist, so I tend to do a lot of shapes and I pull the images out of it. So back in the day when it was a light box, I would do really rough layouts at the actual print size. So you have production size layouts, and then I would just rough in the lettering so I knew about where I'd be working with. I'd blow it up or whatever, 150% or whatever, and I would print it reversed on the back of bristle board. Okay. And then I'd light box the pencils over top that. Gotcha. And then when I inked it, I'd just ink it straight on the boards. Because that way it was the easiest. Now what I do is it's just layers and stuff in Clip Studio. I've been in Clip Studio since probably 2015. Back when it was like Manga Studio 5, and it's so much simpler. Yeah, and you got me onto the Clip Studio, and it's quite a piece of software. You know, I hear the debate between Procreate and Clip Studio, and I see, but they both seem to be very confident. It's kind of whatever your they're both amazing. It's whatever your preference is. Like for Clip Studio, the page manager and the perspective rulers are things that I really find useful for me. So that's kind of my jam. And also because I'm not strictly iPad, I'm desktop a lot, it just works better. And you work a lot in perspective. That's one thing that I think you are super strong at. I love perspective. You show, you're not afraid to throw a building in there and have it be really precise. Yeah. Really precise. And that's something that as we flip through these, you're going to see that lots, like especially... Do you have Gun Street? Gun Street. Wherever it went. He's went over there. So back in the day. Even early on, you were pretty strong at it, though, because I remember you doing a lot of work on that even back when we were, pre-college days. You were working on perspective. So like they're not sequential in this. This was the first story. I don't know if this was the second, though. We moved them around a little bit for flow. Yeah. But like figuring that out, the thing I didn't understand, and again, I'm jealous of artists now because they have the internet and people can tell them, oh, here's like Andrew Loomis's books, here's the stuff, you understand it. Yeah. Now I'd know, okay, my horizon line, everything has to line up. If it's here, then everything has to figure out with their head. And I just make smaller scale going down. Gotcha. I'm aiming for it and I'm really trying hard, but I'm still not quite getting what is happening. But with their local haunt, Max's Eternal KC, I was never the smartest person in the world for making it easier on myself. I'm like, this will look cool, and I have to draw it 45 more times. I'll see if I can actually find it. His bar is actually... Do you remember there's that English pub way down in Medicine Hat that we used to go to every now and then? Yeah. That was roughly based on this way you walk in and move around because there's that second level. So I built this second level into it where... this is not the greatest example, but anyway, so whenever I did it, if you see the bar, you have to actually draw the second level with the other tables and then all this stuff on the wall. So it was basically forced perspective practice right out of the gate, and I regretted it immediately, but it still looks cool. And you've got to, bring in all this intricacy everywhere, yeah. So at one point, I actually had drawn the pictures that would go in each of these, and I just superimposed them. Like, no, we're done with that. That's just stupid. We're not going to do that. Yeah, and I could see that becoming super messy, and even as a reader at some point to be doing that. Yeah. It also doesn't add anything to it. Like you breeze over it so fast that it's really just fluffing yourself up for it. Mm-hmm. So there's Max's. So yeah, because I think sometimes we have a tendency as artists, it can be easy for us to kind of get too involved and too in love with that, and forgetting that it's just a scene that's meant to fly by. Yeah, that was something with Alice Toth's stuff that I really try hard to do. Is you want to direct the reader to a point, right? And the really cool thing is if you ever see like his artist editions where you actually see the underlying artwork where he's working on it, he'll have drawn out like an entire bar and he'll just pour black all over it. Cause like, it's not drawing the focus of what I want. I'm going to sacrifice all that work because it's more effective to go this way. Yeah. So if you plan it out from the beginning with your spot blacks, you don't have to draw the extra detail. And it's also why I draw my balloons right on the page. If I'm doing like for Daisy and stuff, I'll let it right on the page because there's no point doing extra work underneath the balloons. It's just going to get covered up anyway. So yeah, especially for your own stuff where it's not that, oh, I'm going to turn all this artwork over and then they may change. You're the person making those decisions. It's fine. So actually, before I forget on this, So it's dark, but to this point, I had drawn almost nothing but horror stuff. So like all the Gun Street stuff, there was a couple side projects that we'd started that I never finished. That were all horror based, and I've done some side projects as well for other people. You've done
the zombie one.
No. You're talking about the zombie one with the 5 characters. That was like the game. No, that came after this.
Oh, okay.
I hadn't really done a lot of horror stuff. That was my first horror stuff in a long time. But Suicide 5 was kind of the end of it. I'd kind of been doing horror stuff, and I tried a few other things. I did that one, and I'm like, I think I want to try some other stuff for a while because this is a lot. So,
yeah. I mean, how were you getting linked up to is it Jason Pell? Yeah. How did you get linked up to this one? Is it same? Is it similar to how you learned that? Is it just something through the pipeline through the grapevine?
So they're all a little different, and I'm fuzzy on some of them. Jason, I think, had saw my work somewhere, either on social or a different book I'd done, and he connected up that way. For like Captain Flynt, Josh and Lyle had seen my work on DeviantArt.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so that worked really well.
So just your own self-promotion.
Just been posting stuff.
Happened to see it.
But it's really funny because the 2 authors of this were actually friends with Ryan Howe, who did that zombie one.
Yeah.
Though they didn't talk to each other about this at all. So we found that out after. I was like, oh yeah, that's fun.
So you were discovered, sort of for both of them, but in that way.
Independently and then together. And it was like, okay, now we're fighting over who's got the time for it. So it worked really. This is a really fun story. We want to do more of them, but
yes. And so this was a Kickstarter that you folks did, and it was successful. So would you think you would? You've had a few different ones. Even Black Terror, that was through a Kickstarter. Henchmen had a Kickstarter. Is that something you're looking to do more in the future as well? Is there still a well there that's the era for Kickstarters kind of changed over the years.
It's a little different. I know it's hot and cold, but like the thing with Kickstarters is you kind of have to be naturally inclined to be able to run them well. I'm not. I've been really lucky and I've teamed up with people that are. So I'm happy to let them do it. I'm focusing more on like Patreon or like Gumroad stuff and just kind of casual promotion for it. Slow build. For this one, I want to point out too that Rhonda Pattison colored it, and her stuff's absolutely amazing. So it works out really well.
And she's colored your stuff a few times with the Eva Starling, I think.
Which is her own character.
So
she's definitely coloring that one. I actually ended up renting a house after she lived in it for a while too. So we kind of known each other before working together a little bit. So it kind of happily kind of worked out. But I did for the Eva thing quite a while ago. I did a little paper doll thing for her. So I did the base model, and she's been drawing clothing and stuff for it. So every year or two, I get a brand new package of them. So I'm like, what's going on with this? It's kind of a neat little gift.
And so we're jumping ahead quite a few years here in your career.
Yeah, so sequentially this would come after Henchmen.
Yes, after the Henchmen stuff.
And after Suicide 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. And way after Gun Street Girl.
Yes, Gun Street Girl is super early stuff.
Yeah.
Now in this one, but so we'll kind of delve through this a little bit. So this one, I think, like this shows that huge amount of progress that happened in the years where you're doing completely non-humanoid characters and things. Like I'm seeing you really push the boat out.
Yeah.
In terms of the characters you're doing, and as you were saying with like consistency, I think your consistency is really getting nailed on all these even these super challenging characters.
It gets a little floppy in a few parts with like Flynt, where there was a stylization I was trying to hit and it drifted a little bit. I tidied up. I think part of it too was it's a science fiction scenario, right? Which I hadn't done a lot of. So I was trying to figure out how to do that. Because you have like backgrounds that repeat a lot, right? Like corridors and stuff. It's just the nature of it. So it's like trying to figure out how to make that interesting, but not just super basic.
Yeah.
And also like, how do you draw spaceships? Because that's not in my wheelhouse. Technology is not something I gravitate to. So I'm really happy with how it came out. This is actually part of why I do much more detailed character design sheets now, so that I can just have everything at a glance versus me kind of having just a couple sketches I did and be like, it's good enough, because I'm like, what did I mean?
Yeah.
Because like even with the guns right here, they have like almost a turtle shell on top. And I'm like, that's a really neat idea. No wonder nobody's done it. I'm like, because they don't fit on anything. If this big object's sticking out, and you can't carry them in a holster or a sling. So stuff like that.
It reminds me of The Fifth Element, where they're on the luxury liner, and they've got the groks or whatever they're called, have their big weapons as they're assaulting that ship.
It wasn't these. Sorry, as a twig, it's their pistols. These ones I was happy with, and I did replicate for the pistol, but I kept the flared top and not the flared bottom. So it's this weird like half thing, and I'm like, nah. But yeah, Fifth Element's a huge design because again, it's like Mobius. You have all the European stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It hits all those beats in that. It's just awesome stuff. And you're very dynamic in your composition of these shots too.
Yeah, I hadn't done an super actiony thing, I don't think, for a while when I hit this one. So it was a little rusty coming. I was happy with it, but it was more of a struggle for me to realize those shots. And like, I was playing with bigger angles and I hadn't necessarily done stuff like that before. So you get a little clunkier where it's like characters are laying down and stuff. And now I know what I'm doing with it. But like that turned out really well. That was fine.
Yeah.
You just get the waves of characters and you just kind of get like, how do I replicate these without driving myself insane? So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely get lazy and be like, well, maybe they only have 5 soldiers and not 25.
Do you have Black Schuck? We'll get to Black Schuck.
Yes.
This shot I was really happy with was this whole control room setup when they come into it with like that, and then the way it kind of comes down to the hangar bay and stuff. Like at that point, I was feeling really confident in like the designs for everything, and it was
and it speaks to it. It reminds me of like the first time in Star Wars when they're in the Death Star, I think it is, and they're taking over the control room while they're down in the hangar trying to and like you're setting up these huge spaces in a really simple way.
I really love this dude too. It was just like the simple coffee spill and stuff, and I'm positive is all in the script for that, but like just the fun little character interaction of it. The little octopus dude is super fun to draw.
Yeah. He's cool, but a lot of you got all the detail on the tentacles and
that's like 2 limbs is a lot, 4 limbs is worse, and like 8 just managing them all in space is redonkulous.
Yeah, and you're doing lots of creatures with a lot of appendages.
Because like they wanted if I remember correctly, they wanted aliens that weren't humanoid in any case. And you're like, well, if you make it too weird, you have no way for your brain to rationalize what you're looking at. So it has to have some sort of humanity to it.
Yeah.
And like, well, okay, how far can I go without? Yeah.
That's where you always bring in your humanoid animal.
They tend to be really like cartoony at that point. So you kind of scratch that itch at the same time.
Yeah. You tend to find that in a lot of these sort of science fiction things where you've got, you'll have your android or your robot kind of character. You'll have your humanoid animal. And those you can relate to very quickly.
Yeah, like by this point too, you can see like from that last weird perspective to this one, I'm figuring out. But like, remember I was talking about that horizon line? They're not on the same horizon line. My brain hadn't quite figured out. Okay, well, I should have just anchored this, dropped the perspective a bit, and it's just as dynamic, but it's a lot easier to manage. Because like here it works really well because okay, you're all lined up, but here it's just a little bit goofy, and yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, but it seems to work.
That I'm happy with.
I know perspective scares the heck out of me, so
it's not bad.
It's nice to see how much you embrace it in your work.
It's one of those things that I think you need a teacher that makes it make sense for you and for it to click. And once it does, then it's really easy to figure out. Like I still have no idea how like curvilinear perspective works. That's witchcraft, whatever. I'm never going to use it. I don't care. But like Loomis's books were really good for just establishing. Well, this is your eye line. This is how everything sits. And like, oh, this isn't that because if you kind of just put your characters in and you rule it all out and you line them all up, you draw boxes. Like, well, it doesn't have to be like that. If perspective's here and it lines up their knees, all the characters' knees just need to be in a straight line and it means perspective's correct.
Gotcha.
Right? So then you're like, oh, okay, this is actually really easy stuff. And away you go.
That's awesome. It's a good book. I hope Captain
Flynt is fun. Back. I know
I'd like to see that come back.
There was talk of another one right before we started, Bad Karma, and just the way timing worked out, Bad Karma kind of took precedence. So I'll talk to Josh and see.
So let's talk about Henchmen.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, Henchmen is super cool.
That's another Kickstarter one.
Another robot paper one.
Yeah.
And so those folks I meant, they're all sort of connected in, the creators.
So no, these ones are completely
somewhat, or are they
separate from everybody?
Is robot paper sort of a separate entity from all the creators? Like, are they?
Oh no, sorry. This is Brian Wyrick is the guy that. So this is the publisher for it.
Yeah.
And so because that one came after this, we all kind of talked together because I think they came up to me.
So they were kind of sort of all know each other in some way.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Before that, I'm not sure how close it was, but after like Henchmen, just because common thread and stuff. But
so tell me, when you're in Henchmen here, are you working purely digitally yet?
Everything was digital at this point. The first fully digital one was, I should know this. I don't. But like Flynt was fully digital. This was fully digital. Actually, Suicide 5 was fully digital as well. So it must have been somewhere before.
Even by then you were working fully digital.
I think my first fully digital one was actually Gun Street, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, but I guarantee it was that just because my oldest child had been born and I was getting ink everywhere. And I'm like, I need something different than this. So
yeah, so you were a pretty early adopter of
it was like 2015 or something.
Yeah, so that's pretty early. That's when a lot of people were still pretty gun shy with some of that.
They were
stuff.
segueing. Most guys were using like the Wacom side tablets and stuff like that. I'd managed to find a used a Cintiq little 12-inch one from like Ontario that they shipped out for like, I don't know, like $500. It was some stupidly cheap price because it had a couple like dings in it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I built like a stand and I did all this on the tiny little screen. But you can tell on this one, because this would have come really early in those digital days. This was probably my first whole book because I didn't quite know how to set you want to zoom in too much because you want to really wiggle that detail a lot. And you're like, we can't see anything, you zoom back out. So now I always work at actual print sizes and I never zoom in and out.
Gotcha.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
There's a couple scenes in here. When you get to like the bowling alley destruction, or not the bowling alley destruction, the bank destruction. Yeah, with the bowling alley guy.
Yeah, once they're doing their...
Yeah, there's a bank vault that they're in. They're peeking their heads out here. It is... It's right here.
Popping out there?
Right here. So I zoomed in and I did a bunch of stuff. I'm like, you can't tell what any of this is. And so I just because you can see how fine like the lines get back there. I'm like, this is silly. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, because you've got like you even have recognizable guest chairs like you'd see in the like you've rendered it so well. But yes, then it becomes a it'd be out of focus in a film.
Yeah, you're not looking at it and it's just wasting time.
Yeah,
you'll be seeing it. But yeah, like that entire fight was really fun. Yeah, everything there was good. So yeah, it was the Kickstarter that came up first, and then I can't remember how, it was several months that went by, and then they decided to do the 6-issue mini that came out after that.
And you did I think you did a lot of work in terms of coming up with the look of the different main bad guys, like Microwave, and you got, I can't remember his name, Bonehead or
something like that. The gnome guy, Genome is what his name is, if I remember right. On the back, I think it's the Indescribable Bulk. I'm trying to remember.
Yes, and that, oh boy, I have to find the pages he's on.
Or Indescribable.
It's so good because you've actually put that mosaicing of him, so he's out of focus basically. Looks like he's being censored everywhere he is.
It's just a dumb Photoshop filter, but it's so goofy. Like it's fun.
It's very good. And so, did you have a lot of direction from Brian on the look of?
So it's actually Jameson Raymond. So it's kind of weird how it works. So Jameson's the writer, and if I remember correctly, it's like either Jameson's first like big comic writing experience, or it's like one of his. So Brian was kind of Brian was the publisher and the editor. Brian kind of played middleman on a lot of this stuff, helping him interpret a lot of this stuff. And so we'd go back and forth as a group, and Brian would kind of pitch in as needed there or spearhead stuff. So I know I talked with both of them about a lot of this stuff. And some of it, if I remember correctly, was just little like doodles that they did. It was like, it kind of like this, and then I'd elaborate. Other ones, it's just like, it's this thing. And I'm like, okay, I'll come up with something. I don't think she had any character designs. I don't think Microwave did. Most of it I think was just what's this like? Let's go back and forth until we come up with something. So
was it just simply okay? So he shoots blasts of microwave. So I'll figure out some way to accentuate that by having these sort of cups that come out.
Because honestly, most of this is just like, well, the tick is awesome. Let's riff on like the ridiculousness. And I think at that point too, Venture Brothers had been out, so I was kind of riffing not necessarily on that. There's that same kind of aesthetic to villains. So. There was a lot of designs. So after this, they had another friend, Travis Chance, if I remember correctly what his name was, that did a game that was kind of a similar thing where you match tops and bottoms of heroes and villains. I think it ended up designing like 300 characters or something.
Oh, wow.
That. It was insane. Every combination of like costumes I could think of. And like, the robots were fun. And, and then like, here's another thing too, where like, you don't need to see the lab he's stuck into or all that crap. It's just, here's a few tables, you get the idea.
You imply that it moves back into that space.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's much more of economy of.
Yeah. And I can really see that you're nailing like how much detail should be here to make it make sense.
So the funny thing too is, so when we started it, we published this through Diamond. So like the first issue of the Kickstarter one, the mini was actually through Diamond. So when you do Diamond, you have to have them on specific deadlines so they ship on time, right?
Yes.
So we had 3 or 5 months lead for the first one, and then Jameson was reworking scripts, this is not knocking Jameson, but like script time got it smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm like, okay, I'm now doing a monthly book that's maybe a week before print for completion. So like just the sheer speed of it meant I was being much more economical with everything, which I think actually helps it a lot of the time where I didn't have time to overthink a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, sometimes I think those constraints cause us to then think on our feet, and then that's when we come up with our most creative solutions.
Yeah, because
for those constraints.
Really happy with like everybody's much more stylized at this point. It's a lot clearer what's happening. Actually, that's a caricature, the author. Now that I remember, it's Jameson. And like even just the focus of it, I'm using gray tones a little bit more because I know if it's going to be gray, I don't want to dwarf it with spot blacks where like here I will. Yep. So I'm trying to just pull that space apart a little bit. The only page in this book I'm not really thrilled about is this last one because we were right at deadline and Brian is like, can we just have one more panel? Because it wasn't in the original script. We have one more panel of them like dragging away and I had nothing left in the tank. And I'm like, okay, we're just going to draw it like this. And it had to go out the door. And it's not that it's bad. It's just, I wish I would have had, another day or two to just figure out what it was going for versus that.
Yeah, it's good. It's good though, because you think about a lot of those like last shots of things, they often will, almost the style will change for that.
Yeah.
Just to have a larger effect on the audience.
Yeah.
So I would say it actually worked.
It's one of those things where I'm probably just dumping on it more because I have a vision in my head of what I wanted and it was not what came out. So
gotcha.
It happens. Cars are like pulling hen's teeth for everybody, right? It's horrible and weird and ephemeral. You can't quite grab it, right? I will say Bad Karma has taught me how to draw cars much more. Like even as much as Daisy did, Bad Karma's like, I'm totally comfortable with cars. It's fine. Whether they work or not doesn't matter. I'm still comfortable doing it. So
for sure.
It's just doing it.
Let's move on to Black Terror.
Black Terror was really fun. And it just, I don't even remember how I connected up with Jeff on that one. But yeah, it was.
And it's cool because, the end result. Yeah, Jeff McClellan, is it, right? So it's kind of neat because it almost, you end up being, it's like a little anthology almost, because it's got an earlier story.
So they'd done this first, long before I'd ever come in. And my knowledge of Golden Age characters is not vast because there's tons of them, right? So I didn't know Black Terror was actually a Golden Age character that was public domain at this point. So I'm like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I was doing stuff. I'm like, oh, I have all this reference material if I'd have just looked for it. And then it kind of clicked. But
yeah, so they kind of sold the Kickstarter based on, hey, we've got this existing one. We're going to expand further on this. And we're taking the character and showing him in his old age.
Yeah.
So
it was fun.
So did your work on it? You had some pages done, I think, for the Kickstarter as well. Is that right?
So I think I had if it wasn't the first few, we just picked a few and was like, we'll just do these ones first. Just to say that this is what the book will look like. Because like you said, they were selling it on that, but if the rest of it looks differently, you don't want to surprise people and go, ha. So yeah, we popped that in there. But no, I'm really happy with this. This is a really fun book. My only regret to this is I wish I was as skilled now or then as I am now so that I could push a little bit further. Because as fun as it was, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd have tweaked stuff. But just a bunch of geriatric heroes just kind of schlepping around was really fun.
And who did your colors on this one?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure, actually.
I don't remember.
This was as much as I'm a gun for hire and all that stuff. I was really a gun for hire where I kind of came in, gave my pages. I didn't really see it till it was done.
Emma Glaze.
Okay.
Let's see. So Ryan Howe, Alan Weiss did page 1, then Thomas Marzinovic, Alan Gallo, David Jameson, and Emma Glaze colors. Yeah, because I'd say the colors are really wild in this one. Like there's a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
And it really works with your art. Because I think of your art often as, I've seen so much of your work in black and white.
Yeah.
And then I see it with more flat coloring. And this one has much more dimensional coloring.
Much more rendering, yeah.
But it works. Like it's one of those things where that simpatico that happens when you match the right artist with the right colorist. And she takes your work and I think her stuff works really well with it.
I find that when you do heavy blacks, it's a very soft touch with the cell shading, so it doesn't. They're not fighting, and they do a really good job throughout the book of making sure it works well. For myself, I much prefer flat colors. I like that retro style because I feel it there's no fighting with the spot blacks at that point. But no, this works really well. Like even here, it's very very light touch in that, was really just kind of popping out those shadows a bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really nice.
Yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah, that balloon is ridiculous. Yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah, what a fun book this is.
Yeah.
And are all of the characters in this are all Golden Age? Were all existing characters?
They must be. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
My tweaking on that they were Golden Age came after the fact for the most part. Like Black Terror from the hop, or not from the hop, but like while I was doing it. But the rest of them I think are, but I'm not really sure.
Because this fellow here, he reminds me of the Jam from Bernie Moreau.
You're right.
He's got that same look and almost like the same color scheme, and the way he's got the sort of cowl just kind of draped over his head and the exposed is just like the Jam.
So that one I never thought of that, but the only reason it's draped like that is because he's older and he wouldn't want to tie because it would be saggy anyway, right? So it's just a happy.
Yeah, they're kind of flown out of their clothes. Yeah,
I'm sure that the dude with the revolutionary stuff is a guy too. I swear I've seen him in stuff as well.
Yes, yeah, that one for sure. I'm pretty sure was I can't.
Yeah, but you can see here too. Like I'm using the blacks much more sparingly as the background to separate elements out and not draw attention to it.
Yeah.
One thing I try to consciously do that I fail because I get busy is that you want like just some objects in the foreground to make that space feel really like a space versus just like, here's characters, right? And like obviously your panel requirements dictate how much you can get away with. But like even adding that lamp here feels much more full versus...
Makes a space, yeah. Even and having them writing and having a stack of paper just makes it so that they exist in a space rather than floating in a space.
There's one thing me shooting myself in my foot because I thought it would look cool and not realizing how much work it would be. I decided that I would put his chair at a 45-degree angle to the room. Which means I couldn't just do one perspective grid. I now had to make two perspective grids that would line up. And that was the first time I really did that consistently. And now I do it all the time because now I'm comfortable with it. But at that time, it was like, why did I do this? This is insane. And it doesn't look goofy or anything like that, but it was just something that...
It just shows how you challenge yourself. Continue. So in every single book we've discussed, there's been something where you said, well, I tried this thing that shot me in the foot, but it made you grow every time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You
never wasted.
It seemed like you learned something every time you did that.
This one was really fun, but I'll let you start on it.
Yeah. Mark Allen Will wrote this. So I had the good fortune. I met Mark this summer at a little show here in Calgary that we were both at. Really nice guy. And he does a lot more stuff that's sort of based on more like old, almost like folklore. And
he does a lot of historically based stuff, right? But like you said, it could be folklore. It's not necessarily like it's specifically historically accurate that way. It could just be a time and the setting for it. But he loves history and like,
Yeah, definitely. And so this is a really cool story. And so how did this come about? How did you get linked up with Mark?
I've known Mark for a really long time, and it was always like we should work on something together. And I've known his wife Elaine as well, and
who's also a very talented artist.
Yeah, and her coloring is stunning. Just her choices and stuff are so brilliant. But it just kind of was a synchronicity of we both were open between projects. And like, well, let's do this. And so he brought this to me, and I'm like, again, I haven't done a horror story in a long time. It's kind of fun, and you get like the Viking aspect and that. What I didn't count on was so if I do a modern book, there's a lot of reference material. I can find stuff. For this specific town in England at that time, there is a incredible lack of anything. There is a model in the town itself of the castle or the keep or whatever it is specifically, and roughly what the town looked like in a very loose way. And I'm like, so a lot of it's made up on the fly because I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, at least
this is a Viking book. This is a different one.
You can say, well, thatched roofs and things like that. But like once you get into the actual Black Schuck stuff.
So like back here, it's historically accurate adjacent. So it's Vikings with like, with the quilted armor and stuff like that. But the thing is, I realized I couldn't, if you have an army of characters, you can't design each one because you'd be years doing it, right? So what I ended up doing was, here's 3 different pants, here's 3 different tops, here's some different armor accessories, and I just play mix and match with stuff.
So suddenly you've given yourself 30 different combinations.
So you'd end up with very similar legs a lot of times because the pants tuck in through the either the strappings or the boots. You'd end up with like those kind of slatted armor bits. The way I played that off was with the English forces there. And it would have been Saxons, I want to say. It's been a little while since I've done this. generally they just show up as themselves as well. Whatever armor that person had is what they show up, but they didn't have that consistent armor. But I'm like, I can't do that because now there's just two things. There's no visual distinction between the two sides because we're just kind of cobbled together. Mm-hmm. But also I'm then designing two completely different sets of stuff and driving me insane. So they kind of became a faceless aggressor to everything, which worked fairly well in that. And at a glance, you see, okay, these are our heroes. These are the bad guys. Easy peasy.
And right? and a lot of people are recognizing, they'll say, oh, okay, chainmail around, chainmail veil there. That's a common aspect that you would have seen there. Yeah. And it's sort of attributed to that Anglo-Saxon force.
And I don't remember if Mark putting sketches in here, but I gave him a lot of sketches of like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Because he was specifically like, Vikings didn't have horns. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I know that, Mark. It's fine.
As long as you're not doing, the old prototypical.
But like the Viking village and stuff, and like the way the beds were laid out, it was pretty good even 5 or 6 years ago for finding reference for that roughly, where people were either pulling historical things or rebuilding themselves. One of the best finds for this is like Pinterest, where people are doing historical reenactments, tons of Viking materials, and they talk about how they built stuff, and so it was really wealth of riches there.
Yeah. So how long? This is kind of a one and done.
Yeah.
This one here. So this wasn't collected in any other way, was it? It was always this full one shot.
Yeah, it's a one off.
Yeah. Versus some of the other ones that were multiple issues in that, like
Henchmen. So I'm not sure if it was a specific thing Mark had wanted to do, or if it was what Renegade wanted to do as publication, put it all as one big thing. Because I think it'd only be big enough for maybe 2 or 3 issues at most anyway. So in that kind of case, it's better for bookshelves if you've got just a book. Right?
Yeah, they know a nice square bound.
And that's it. So.
Works great for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's that town that you're rendering.
Yeah, and then I like the goofy thing is it wouldn't have been like that. It would have been perfectly lined up. It would have been much more uneven. But just for like sheer efficiency's sake, I went with much more gridded just to kind of keep things moving.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where you hit that thing where you make something too realistic to where people say that it doesn't make sense to them. Where sometimes you have to play a little bit into that what visually is going to make sense to them. I've
noticed too, and I'm not sure if this is an accurate theory, but European artists tend to have much more angled streets and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure it's because their towns tend to be older and much more not gridded, whereas ours are like perfect grids all over the place. Yeah. So we naturally lay stuff out like that. And the more I started looking at European stuff, I would do the irregular patterning more. But like at that time, I wasn't exposed to much of it, and that kind of art. So yeah, this whole thing is really fun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of side characters. Well, it's not a lot, but there's quite a few side characters that I wish I would have stopped and done model sheets for. So they're not like mirrors of each other, but I'd have put in a much broader visual difference to them because they're fun. But like you could have really played with it for the types of people that you're looking at. This was a hard. It's either here or that. I remember struggling with that, going
trying to look straight up.
Yeah, because Mark wanted a down shot for it, and I'm like, well, if you look like this, it doesn't quite. The angle's not right. It's like you're sacrificing the understanding of the body for the shot, so it's a happy medium of. That's not how you look out a window, but it makes more sense in
Yeah. How do you avoid that sort of uncanny valley part of just the angle of it, without looking like you're doing a light field?
Yeah. Here you can see it's the twisted body is how you look out a window, right? But if you're doing this, then he kind of just looks like he's laying down. Like I don't understand spatially what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'd say it helps here in that it does establish that and then shows him craning out the window, so that it lends more context to what that pose is.
Yeah.
Which is, not an easy thing. It's, and you're showing it from several different angles then.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So this is you like returning to your horror comic.
More horror stuff,
Horror comic roots almost.
Which is really fun because I hated horror stuff when I was younger. And I'm like, it's fine. It's awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah. And you get to do some fun stuff and like really play with how it looks. Yeah.
No, it was really fun. Mark had a really fun monster story here. This is actually Elaine's dad.
Oh.
Which is weird because I'd never met him at that point. I only seen photos. When I finally did meet him, I killed you. This is a really weird moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the one that sets his head very gently into Black Shuck's mouth once he realizes there's not much hope trying to brandish a weapon.
Yeah.
And so the coloring on this one is really great too, because it really like there's this one very much is like
Elaine did colors.
Oh, Elaine did this one. Okay. Yeah, because it's very much like more cinematic, more film, where it's full color grading.
Yeah, you see, like, it's definitely like, this is a torchlit village, everything's on fire because it's all applied to it. And like, this is one I love, where you get the coolness, but that light still kind of filters into it. Yeah.
Where you can tell you're like, you're running through the streets of town, like, and then when you've reached when you reach the large chapel and she's running on the outside and it's less lit and less likely to be populated with other townsfolk.
Yeah. This was neat too, because like I hadn't drawn, like most of the characters didn't have a lot of dresses and flowing gowns that I'd drawn in stories before that. So I got to play with it a bit, and some's more successful than others, but it was nice. And now I draw them a lot more, and it was a good starting point. This was fun too.
Yeah. This whole part with the her defending herself with this and it burning him back is really great, because and seeing like him be seeing this monster be confused with what's happening. Yeah.
The one thing that was trickier, that was when I sketched it, you do it on white backgrounds and stuff like that. And Black Schuck was really a lot more just a big black blob of an object. But I realized if I was going to put like the atmosphere into it, well, now I have to show a lot more of him. And it was always a balancing act between how much to show and how much to shade. And like, it was tough, right? Because I wanted to be super mysterious, but then he would just be invisible.
Well,
right?
and that is such the, that's the same struggles that people making horror movies run into, is how much do we show of the big bad, especially if it's going to be completely dark. And you see some films get it completely wrong, where they say it's just a mess, I can't tell what's going on. I think about that second Alien versus Predator film, where it was kept completely dark.
You remember it? Yeah.
Nobody remembers it. That's the thing, because you never pulled much visual information out of it.
Attack the Block is the opposite thing, where your monsters are solid black, but you're never unsure of what you're looking at. You always know how they're placed, but it doesn't feel like you just hit them with a light, right? Yeah,
exactly. They played with light and like strong hits of light in that one.
Yeah, that's a beautiful movie.
For me, Attack the Block, in my mind's eye, when I think about I get that sort of like a blurred look thinking of it, is like it's solid blacks with like bright color. They weren't afraid to have bright color with it, like almost neon.
The bright blue is the mouth, right? The eyes glowed a little bit too. Yeah, this was a great story.
Yeah, this is a great book. I was and then it's got a couple pieces, and I don't think you drew these.
No,
ones.
This wasn't me that did it. This was actually Justin Schauf, I think, that did the last. I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong. I'm terrible, but his stuff's really fun. He did a Frankenstein book later on. That was a ton of fun. I think it's called Frankenstein's Monster. I can't remember, but Justin's an amazing artist. He actually runs an art store now.
Oh wow! Yeah. So this is a great book. I love it.
Side note to this, and they can't tell, but like the cover stock they use is that weird like soft plasticky paper, and I love it.
Yeah, it's got that. It's that silk lamination.
Yeah,
where so nice. And you see that more in books now. Like I find when I was at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon over the holidays, how many books I picked up that have the silk lamination. And it was like, this was a major novelty at the time, but now you're seeing it more just because people are recognizing that feel is so nice.
I just sit and play with that book every time I have it. Like even before, when Mark gave me my comp copies, I was just sitting and playing with the book while I was talking to him about it. I'm like, this is nice. It's because like, this is a nice cover too. It's also kind of that
silk lamination. And this does have that.
A little bit, but not as much.
Yeah. Like, not to the same degree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these two anthologies first before we get into Daisy.
Wildly different.
So how did you get involved with this place? So this is very Indigenous focused, Canadian history, like linked to a CBC podcast, and just the sheer amount of stuff in here and the variance of stories. How I need to know how you became involved.
I'm gonna say I don't remember. No, that's not 100% true. I don't fully remember because it was a few things. I think Donovan, who I've worked with drawing like Space Big Amadeus and stuff. He's colored a lot of my work on other projects.
Yes, and does quite a bit of color in Image now, I think. Is it?
No, he does Chapter House. He's recolored like Marvel Masterworks editions. He figured out like the original angles they used for the dot patterns on everything. And when he recolors stuff, it's not just So when you see somebody do like, it's an old comic and they just hit that Photoshop color thing. No, he'd work out the color grids and he put in the proper dot mixes to make pinks and stuff. And,
I remember talking to him about when it was probably at the time he was really figuring out those, and we were talking about screen angles.
Yeah.
And because he's a genius when it comes to color.
It's amazing.
So anyway, and he colored your story that's in here.
He colored a lot of these. I think he colored 4 or 5 of them. And I came in a little late on this. I'm not going to find any. There's 20 stories in here.
There's a lot.
I came in really late on this. A lot of it had already been in production. And is either Donovan, I think Donovan might have said, are you interested in something? I'm working with these guys. I said, sure, pass it along. And then I think the editor had contacted me. And I remember the process more than the setup. So that the editors would contact me and they're like, it's a big Indigenous storybook. And I'm like, I'm not Indigenous. I don't know this. Are you sure? They're like, yeah, it's fine. And Highwater, the publisher that put this out, is really good because the author's Indigenous. Most of the creators of this are Indigenous, and if they're not, they're paired up with somebody who is, right? So I had that foundation. They've got people that check the cultural sensitivity and stuff to make sure you're accurate. They were good about providing reference and stuff, and it was a really good process for back and forth and develop. I did so many sketches for this and like figuring out things, and I'm really happy with it. I was really lucky in that Nimki, the story I did, it takes place on like a farm, so it was
you could draw from a farm.
It was like,
draw from
it
experience.
The hardest part about this was the lineage of like ancestors going back, because the clothing, like at a certain point, there's just no real records of what it looks like, and we didn't have reference. I'm like, well, I'm just going to abstract it and go with that because I don't want to be wrong and I want to still give that sense of it.
And at some point, I bet you the differences in the clothing would be less pronounced.
Like even from here to there, there's not a lot of difference in it, and so that was the trickiest part. And
you are actually teamed up with another artist who is doing the sort of more sketch stuff, and so so it's you in combination with another artist on this. So what was the process of that? How do you make way for it? Because there are some places where it's your art and their art interacting.
So originally I was going to do both, and I didn't have the cultural understanding of how to do it the way the author wanted. And so I believe that was Jen who did that. Let me just double check that so I'm not
it's at the beginning of the
talking out of my butt.
Yeah, it was Jen
Storm. Yeah. Just so I'm correct on everything. So Jen and I have been talking about something else on it. I can't remember. There's some other aspect of this thing we've been talking about, and I think she was trying to help me understand some of the stuff that the author was bringing up. And at some point, we're like, well, what if Jen just draws it, right? And Jen's like, well, I've never really done it. Is that all right? I'm like, well, I'll help you with the positioning. I'll give you the rough sizes and everything. And she did. And then I just overlaid them into the original art. And then away we went. I think this might be the only one I did other than the few at the end.
Gotcha. And at that point, you are informed enough from...
Actually, I don't know if I did that. No, I didn't do that one either. That's not my drawing. I'm like, I know my style. That's not it. So I did just a couple at the end. So I think the hybridization works really good too, because it pops it out more as though it's kind of that dreamlike element to everything. And it's, it worked well.
And it's a really powerful story because it touches on the 60s scoop and that history. And, and that's something that we've had in our Genki stuff that we're doing. So I liked seeing that the story was based around that, and it's a dark part of our history in Canada that still continues, and
for sure. And that was one reason I at the very beginning I was very insistent. I'm like, are you sure you want me for this? Because like this story is incredibly powerful. Like, wouldn't it make more sense for this? And like, no, it's fine. Like, we got it. So I was very lucky, and I feel very fortunate to be able to contribute to it in any way. Because it's an amazing story. I wish more people had an understanding of, because it was really gross and terrible and shouldn't have been a thing.
And I'd say this entire book is really great. And it's cool because you see some names that I see some names I recognize, like Scott Ford is doing, Kyle Charles doing the illustration on this. Like, I'm seeing names that I recognize.
It's really a murderer's row of like Canadian Kongs creators, really.
And it's great stuff. And you do see Donovan's
he's all over the place
doing colors for about 4 or 5 different ones. So this is one I think people both within Canada, I think people out of Canada should be reading this
everybody should read it.
I would like to see more of this stuff going outside of our borders. It's nice to see that a lot of this is being embraced more and more. But yeah, it's a hell of an anthology, and it's cool that you're a part of it.
Yeah. Highwater's an amazing publisher. Like all their stuff is like super high quality and really, really excellent stuff. No, it's a wonderful book, and it's the podcast came out after it. I can't remember exactly how long, but I know they discussed it like do you guys agree that, like they've expressed interest, should we do it? And I'm like, well, yeah, like of course. I'm not sure how they're going to do it, and like they talked to us about it. Like each of the creators, there's the little podcast crew just kind of discussed what it was, and they're like, well, what do you have? And I'm like, I don't know how to tell you how to make this work. Like I drew it, but like I'm not. Good luck.
But it does. Sure. Each one of these is a story and a deeply and like enough of a story that they could.
Oh yeah. It was just weird to be talking to the artists about it. I'm like, I'm not sure my contribution will help you any. Yes, I will happily help. But yeah. So no, I'm glad it got the legs it did because it's a fantastic.
It's really good.
Yeah.
True war stories. So you working with Alex DeCampi again?
Yes, Alex is amazing.
That's someone you've been working with quite a bit.
Yep.
So this is a great one because it's like actual stories from the people who've experienced it and some pretty heavy stuff. Like
I think the one editor too was a vet as well. I'm trying to remember if she's still active service or if she's a vet.
Was a vet of the Iraqi conflict.
Yes,
I believe.
That's what it was.
Yes.
Yeah. My memory is terrible. So Alex is really funny. This came about because of Bad Karma. So I've been working on Bad Karma with her, and we were Bad Karma's 7 chapters. I think we were on chapter 4-ish or whatever. And she's like, "Do you want to do a story in this?" And I'm like, "Well, if you don't mind me stopping Bad Karma for you." She's like, "No, it's great. Excuse me. So go do it." So I did it. It was really fun. How I met Alex, she had what was it called? She had on her social media. She had, I think it was called Saturday Night. No, Hell's Kitchen's Movie Club. And so it was Bucky and the Punisher, roommates in an apartment, just talking about movies for 2 to 3 pages. That was it. And I've been a fan of it for a really long time. And I think there was like 4 or 5 that come out. And she just posted, she's like, the current artist is busy. Does anybody else want to do it? And I immediately messaged them like, yes, I will do it. Look at my art. I would love to do this. And so I did one of Punisher and Bucky. And from that, weeks or months had gone by, and she just randomly emailed me and was like, I have an idea for a story. Are you interested? I'm like, oh yeah, this would be, this is super fun. I love your work. I'd love to do more. I hadn't realized at the time that it would be a almost 300-page epic thing that was, and I don't think she knew at the time either because she'd written it as like a screenplay, and so like the way it broke down to comics form wasn't quite established yet. So yeah, that's how it all kind of ended up as this.
Yeah, and as you find, a lot of things they don't translate 1-to-1.
No.
There's a lot of massaging you have to do.
So it was weird coming off Bad Karma, which is very much like a Shane Black 80s like action buddy thing, right? To go into this it's not super serious, but it's much more of a serious subject matter thing that's much more specific. Well, and you're telling real people stories. Yeah, and this is actually the author. It's like that's him all the way through it. So this was interesting, even just for finding reference, right? Because you can kind of find some of it, but at the same time, it's not like here's what the camp looked like. So
did you find anything? Did you find anything of the FOB or anything like that? They were the Fort Operating Base that they were at.
So I
imagine you have to kind of embellish and come up with a lot
for like this. I can't remember if I found this exact one or if I found one similar where it had like these pylons set up. It was like one photo, and they just showed like a few of the tables. I'm like, all right, I guess we'll extrapolate that out. So I kind of hide the rest of it.
So it at least gives you something that's based somewhere. Like I know this is generally how they would probably pull off an event like this.
Yeah, so it's kind of roughly a wall texture, and then you pass it back and forth. And like Alex is super detail oriented, and like the author, because he'd been there, was detail oriented too. So we know roughly what all this stuff looks like. I've gotten so much better at cars since this, but that's not the point. The only time
you're also doing big chunky armored SUVs, which isn't easy.
These 3.
You're able to
I'm like, I don't know. I can't do these. So I think I ended up buying a 3D model and dumped it into Clip Studio and just dropped it into the perspective and just basically did a draw over of it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't have 12 hours to draw these 3 vehicles that are only this tiny little bit. This gate thing, there was a lot of references for that, for like all this bit.
Yeah.
This shockingly had a ton of reference that I was able to get.
So were you able to lightbox that then?
No,
or
I just
Clip Studio?
I very rarely lightbox stuff because it doesn't usually fit properly. So the amount of work I spend adjusting it, I may as well just draw it right off the hop, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm guilty of lightboxing just about any time I can.
Oh, but there's no problem with
just
it.
because, well, but definitely the what you mentioned about it being sometimes your problem is, well, I'm not going to find the angle. It's sometimes easier to say, well, I know what it looks like now. I know that it's stonework that's in this, so I'll just I can draw it to whatever perspective I want, apply my perspective, and then I know the texture that I need to work back in.
The other thing I know, like I've done it too, where I will I'll take that reference and I'll pop into like Blender or something, build a really fast, like chunky 3D model of it, and then I can move it around and maybe just do screenshots that I can do draw over stuff.
Great.
Because like these. Because I knew they weren't like the focus of anything, a couple panels, they're very reduced and simplified from what they would actually look like, and then I just shadow them.
But the same as you were talking about in Henchmen, putting all the fine detail would be a waste of time anyways. Yeah.
Whereas here, I wanted to be a little more specific. I wanted to make sure like the AKs and stuff were all correct. And stuff.
You want that to look correct.
Yeah,
for sure.
This was really fun. Like it is serious, but it was a really fun little kind of version from Bad Karma for a bit. The hardest part, honestly, was the valleys and the mountains.
Oh yes,
because it's how do you draw that space and feel like that space
feel as large? Yeah. How do you make it as large as that and as real of a space?
Because there are some trees and there's stuff like that, but a lot of it is just it looks flat.
Shrub, fine shrubbery and stones.
Yeah, right? Color plays so much in how we perceive like landscapes, where you can't tell that bush, but you know that dark spot next to the little lighter brown spots is something. Well, how to do that to ink? Well, kind of, but yeah.
No, it's great.
So that was a learning thing too. But like, that was a really fun experience.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good anthology. That one.
Yeah, they did a hardcover edition too, which is really nice.
Yeah, and I love that it had some story. Like it has some stories that go beyond the battlefields. Yep. Yeah, really good stuff.
It's a wild mix, and it's not like a true war stories was like glorification or anything like that.
It's not like I've got some old EC stuff. The Two-Fisted Tales, and it's not that. It's not Zanam. It's not Two-Fisted Tales. But it's actual people's stories and delving into also like the fallout of war and everything else. So
it's not like that. What is it? It's like that one men's magazine of the guy in the river fighting. It's like, what is it, beavers or something that are like attached to him, and he's just fighting them all off. No, that was a good book.
It's very good. So let's jump on to Daisy.
Daisy, that's a lot of stuff.
This one's really cool. So tell us, when did you decide to do it? And what was the impetus for you, like making this like big jump into like this like spanning serialized webcomic to start off with?
So I hadn't had any projects lined up. I can't remember if I just finished Henchmen or Captain. It would have been Captain Flynt. It's one of those. I just finished up. I had nothing really on the horizon, and I'm like, I need to do something because otherwise I'm just gonna fall to crap. I gotta keep my skills up. So I hadn't really done my own thing more than a few pages. I'd written. There's one Gun Street story I'd written, which actually wasn't a Gun Street story. Barb had liked it enough. It was like a little horror thing about it was called Fox in a Box. It was for a online contest thing. But anyway, it worked well enough that we wrote that. So that was, we put bookends and made it a Gun Street thing. But that was the last thing I'd done on my own. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to try my own stuff because I like drawing stuff. Let's just throw a bunch of stuff that I like into at the wall and see what sticks. So that's kind of where Daisy it's really dumb too. I don't like drawing vehicles, so let's draw something that has to do with planes. That'll be smart.
Let's do nothing but planes of all sorts of all shapes and sizes too. Because you've got the sort of the police planes that are like little Spitfires, and you've got the big one, like the big
let's get as complicated as possible.
The cargo plane that Daisy's flying, and
so I think if I remember correctly, I had been I'd been looking at. Was it Tad Stones? One of the guys that had worked on Tailspin, and they were kind of showing like viz dev that they'd done for it, and I saw like the Sea Duck and stuff. I'm like, well, that was always fun, and like as much as I love Tailspin, I much preferred like Barks's Duck Adventures, and then like Indiana Jones influence and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I can take pieces from everything and just do something fun. So one of the things I liked about the plane was it allows your character to go to different places, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really easy way to get her around to different spots and not really make it small. And it's also because it's action serial, I could play against my weaknesses as a writer and play my strengths as an artist by fairly minimal diatribes verbally and going with visual diatribes, where it's like, here's a whole lot of action and we'll just put some dialogue in after just to kind of keep things going. So it worked really well. And as I progressed, I got better with the writing, I think. And I'm much happier. It gets more complicated as I go.
And as you go on, I'd say you become better and better as you go about creating these interpersonal relationships between Daisy and other characters and other characters and each other.
Yeah, so like the very first one, Cursed Island, and you can tell which is the first one because it's the only one that is not a alliteration, which should be the Infernal Island, but I'm a moron. So I didn't know what other characters were. I literally was like, I'm going to do this. So this was the little, I think 12 pages or 16 or something that I did. It was like, here's Daisy. She flies a plane. No cast of characters, nothing like that. Don't know who most of these people are. That's her brother. Wasn't at the time, I don't think. And to prove how little I think about it, I named her brother Thomas, and the guy that hijacks her in this one is also named Tom. I'm like, oh, that was dumb. Really dumb. Too late. So
it's a good 50s name. Tom. That's a good one.
So dumb. So anyway, as I go further and I figure out who they are, then I can bring in extra characters. And so like one of her best friends, you bring in.
Yeah, especially like Stolen Socialite, I think, is where you really started showing the like you were doing character
so that's where
characterization of like the additional characters and like having much more personality showing.
Yeah. And you can see where I figured out, okay, the bricks can actually fade into the background, right? So yeah, like I needed somebody to you need somebody to talk to your main character, right? Otherwise they're super boring. They're just talking to themselves and they seem crazy. So that's when I think I introduced a ton of characters. So like her brother's in there, Mac's in here, a lot of the police characters. Which now with like police, I'm like, oh, I gotta get rid of the police somehow because I don't really want them in here. So I got a whole thing with that. But like, yeah, her brother kind of fits in, and he wasn't even really, I think, a part of this at that time. And then that, by definition, creates more backstory, and then the whole elevator shootout and stuff.
And for someone who talks a lot about vehicles and that, every single one.
Many vehicles. So this is a Frank Miller shot.
In this one, you've got the cars.
Yeah.
You introduce dirigibles. You've got blimps, and then you've got you've got pirate ships in this one.
Oh no,
right?
there's no pirate. No, I never draw a ship because that would be madness.
Pirate ship.
No, there's no pirate ship. There is.
But you give yourself a different setting and a different amount. Like you had to draw a dinghy in this one.
Yeah, I know. I realized too that for like 4 books in a row, I ended up with her getting dunked in water, and I think I comment on one of them where I'm like, huh.
It becomes a Die Hard 2 thing. Like, how does the same shit keep happening to the same guy?
Yeah. And then this one was I'd read a Don Rosa story that was specifically Donald Duck doing this weird building thing that really has nothing to do with this. But I'd drawn the first few pages. I couldn't figure out how to do with it. And I saw this Rosa thing with Donald. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And it allowed me to kind of figure out the structure for the rest of it. Where it's just kind of that running through things in a very flat perspective.
A really great like side story of just like the zany rush to catch this damn bird.
And then later on, I really like the short ones, and I end up doing it in Paranormal Perils, where it's a series of short stories that play into the larger one. So it's I think 3 stories for that one.
Yeah, it's just. And so all of this stuff started out as web comics going up on
they're all free to read online too.
At what point did you say, okay, I'm ready? Because you started publishing them pretty early. But at what point did you say, like, I want to make that jump? Or was that always the plan to also take a jump into print?
So the plan was always, as each one wraps, put it out as a volume, which is why they're the format they are. Okay. Because it'll play Fantagraphics put out some Barks collections of stuff where they were this half format. Because if you look at a lot of European stuff like Asterix, they're essentially cut right in the middle. So you can do it as a full page, you do it as a half page. So I draw these at full American Comics 1015, right? And then I literally just make sure there's a cut line in the center. So this top tier is bottom tier, top tier, bottom tier. But I knew I liked this format because 1, it was cheaper, but 2, it looked different. And I'm like, I really like this kind of weird object, which it kind of, again, counters against me because it's harder. It doesn't fit anybody's preset formats. But I found a printer out of Edmonton, I think at that time, that gave me a really good deal on it. I'm like, okay, so as I finish each volume, I'll just make sure it goes into press.
Yeah. So those first ones started going out that.
Yeah, those first two were through that company, and then this one, the publisher at the time, Soaring Penguin, put out. And then when that lapsed and I got it back, I switched to the Amazon format, where the interiors are the same size, but the book is about a half inch bigger.
Yeah.
Which actually is nice. It's again that silk stock, right?
And you got the silk, and you have that silk laminate. The return of that,
which
that
actually
really
isn't a choice. They just give it to you.
Yes, I have a couple of other print-on-demand ones that I've gotten from other authors, and it's always this really nice silk laminate.
So, like, as I was flying through this, I really didn't like. I'd done a logo for it here, and I was just like, I'm just going to slap it together, and I ended up spending more time on the actual book title logos. When I got the rights back for this, I was like, I actually want to redesign this. So I ended up doing a slightly different trade dress with the logos and everything. I'm much happier with it. It's a little more, it's not super retro, but it plays with more like futurist style fonts at the time. It's like that little propeller element.
Yeah, it's got that futurist look, and then it's got the propeller. Yeah, that stylized propeller is super cool.
It's more like a stamp now.
It's subtle at first. Yeah. And like I could imagine this like on the side of her, stenciled on the side of her plane sort of thing.
This also at an angle is a bear. Anytime you use an angle, nothing fits. So I'm like, I just want to do it really simple. The other thing with this too was this fights visually for that. And this recedes a lot more, but still stands out as a brand for it. But this it's essentially like the Hardy Boys thing, right?
Yeah.
And the adventure of whatever. So
you got your Nancy Drew Hardy Boys kind of thing. Yeah. And each one just going in a wildly different direction.
Yeah.
You got your Buccaneer in this one. Yeah, like your Ghost Pirate, basically.
The only thing that sort of burns me on these is that I have to do the covers first as webcomics. So stuff changes sometimes during the middle. The cover's already done, but that's whatever, it's fine. But like, this is a lot more spot black heavy. I was really concentrating on making sure stuff fit into it and pop. There's like dry brushing going on, and there's very mild hashing going on, just kind of separated a little bit.
I'm sure people have been watching. They've noticed a lot, like what you do with, especially like flames and smoke. Yeah, you do a lot of this dry brush technique that looks really, really smashing.
The really funny thing about this book was I made it like halfway through, and my kids wanted to watch Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm like, I haven't seen that in forever. Let's go watch it. And so we did, and I can't remember which one we finished. I'm like, the ending of my book is whichever Pirates of the Caribbean is. I'm like, oh crap. So I had to go back and rewrite like the entire ending of the book, so it was slightly different. Whoops.
At some point, all Buccaneer stories pass through.
There was a Miyazaki thing too. Like there was just so many things that had like coalesced that I hadn't seen in so long that I'm like, oh, this is really dumb. I gotta fix this. I think there might be Porco Rosso. I can't remember.
If people are looking for the Daisy stuff now, are all of the are they all as printed on demand with Amazon now?
So they're all available in a few spots. You can get them on my website. They're just free to read if you go to daisyblackwood.com. So they'll always be up there to read. They're on my social media as well, but you have to dig through them. You can buy them either on Amazon. Any of the Amazons actually. It's available in all the stores. There's links on my website. You can just search Amazon for them. There's also digital versions, if I remember correctly, up on Gumroad, and I think I'm going to put them on Amazon as the Kindle guided panel stuff. Yeah. Guided panel is really easy, so I want to make sure that's all set up for that too.
Cool.
Because some people like that.
Give yourself another challenge. Why not?
No, actually, it's really easy. If you've never used it, it's literally a template, and you're just like 1, 2, 3, and it auto detects everything, and then you just kick it out as it's whatever Amazon format it is, and it's done.
Perfect.
It's wonderful. So it's a lot of different places to find them. Almost all my comics are available online to purchase if I'm doing them. So
yeah, and you've done some other digital stuff along the way. I'll probably flash some things up on the screen of some of the ones that I have in a more digital format. Yeah. Some of it's been collected, but for me, I found it easiest to find it digitally. You've got your, but I think Eva Starling is one I really love.
Eva's really fun.
Because it's just one small volume, correct?
Oh, yeah. There's
Troubleshooter.
The one I did. There's I think 3 or 4 Eva books total by different artists. So if you like Eva the character, there's quite a few that you can kind of go grab. So I know at one time we started another one that had been drawing. Just things kind of fell apart on it, but I'd like to revisit that at some point.
Yeah, and you've done a few other things, and I'll probably flash a bunch of things up with some links to them and. So you've alluded to your most recent one quite a bit, and we've talked a little bit through it. But let's have a dedicated chat about what you're doing right now.
So Bad Karma. Bad Karma is a wonderful 80s throwback road trip movie between two vets that have both kind of lapsed into their own incredibly screwed up lives, and they kind of through a series of happenstances realize they have a chance to kind of set a few things right with it and maybe get their own lives back in order. And so it's a really wonderful series that's 7 volumes total to create the complete volume. It's available on Panel Syndicate right now in digital form.
And pay what you want.
You can go free. It's free pay what you want. So really wonderful story. Each chapter is at least, I want to say about 50-ish pages, I think. Some are a little bigger, some might be, I don't think any are slightly under. But
they're all pretty beefy.
Yeah. And they're all essentially a full arc. It's never just like, gonna leave you hanging. It'll end on a cliffhanger for the next chapter, but it's never just like, oh, well, I don't really feel fulfilled about that. So
yeah, you feel like you're getting an act of the story.
Yeah.
You feel like you're getting a good standalone portion of it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a wonderful one. The color sonnet D is amazing, and it's some of my most favorite colors I've ever seen on my stuff. Where it's a flat color with, it's almost a Dave Stewart color, where there's really subtle gradients in it and like really subtle shading, but it really allows the spot blacks and stuff to kind of open up, but allows him to really showcase his stuff at the same time. So it's been a really fantastic collaboration. If you like Shane Black movies, or I'm blanking on the guy that did like In Bruges and stuff.
Yeah.
He just has a new one on the Banshee one on Amazon.
Yes, The Banshees of Inisherin, and
or 3 Billboards outside of So,
actually, very much like that's a good call.
Yeah.
Is that 3 Billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri?
So like there's funny bits in it, but it's also a really kind of sad, sweet tale of like, you know, these people that all have very broken lives that are kind of coming back to
a little bit of like retribution and almost like rebirth of you know, them trying to rebirth themselves and make right some of the past wrongs, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a wonderful book that even if I wouldn't have been the one drawing, I definitely recommend it because it's really fun.
Yeah, I'd say check that out on Panel Syndicate. And there are plans for a collected version for us who like stuff on our shelf.
We'll see how it go. I have nothing to say one way or another, but we will. Any plans with different formats and stuff, we'll announce it on social as things come together with
Beautiful.
It, so.
Yeah, you can follow Panel Syndicate. They have a newsletter, so every time a new issue comes out and other issues that they're publishing, they send me a nice email that gives me a nice digest of what's happening. I was very happy when it was, about a couple weeks ago, that it told me that Bad Karma 6 was out. 6 or 5?
6.
6, yes. It's 6.
And 7's coming soon. I think Alex just messaged out a little while ago. It'll be January. Well, it's hopefully not January because I'm going to cover for it, but it'll be like February, March, I think, of 2023.
Awesome.
So it's going to be pretty quick. I think. I'll double check that.
You might have heard her first, folks.
It's on social. It's there.
Check out, you've heard it second or third here. But check it out on Panel Syndicate. And Ryan, what is your website that they can check out your stuff, or what are your socials?
Yeah, so daisyblackwood.com is the easiest one in for it. Links to my socials on that. I'm just overhauling all of that. It'll eventually just be ryanhowe.ca. But for now, Daisy Blackwood will get you there. And then because everything's in flux with socials, there's like 95 of the things, I will link tree out or something off of my main page once I get all those straightened out. But,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. This worked out great. We had Ryan here visiting myself and my partner with his wonderful partner. And this is just simpatico that we're able to finally... Gordon and I talked about doing a retrospective of your work. And I thought late last night as I was falling asleep, Ryan's just downstairs. Why don't we just do this now?
Yeah.
Why don't we just do it? Unfortunately, Gord couldn't join us for it, but Gord said, hey man, you go do your video with Ryan. It's going to be fucking killer.
Yeah,
so I think it was. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And follow Ryan on everything and check out the stuff we're doing. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And we'll see you on the next Genki.